The Creak Fleet's last stand. The vast expanse of space stretched out before Captain Zorak of the Creak Fleet, an endless sea of blackened stars. Yet despite the immense beauty of the cosmos, there was no peace to be found here. On the bridge of his flagship, the Creak Tempest, Zorak gripped the command console tightly, his knuckles pale under the strain. The echoes of explosions from outside the ship rattled the structure, and the cries of dying crew members over the intercom did nothing to soothe the burning weight of impending doom that pressed down on him. The Creak Fleet was fighting for survival, but it seemed to be an impossible task. A mere few hours ago, the Creak forces had felt invincible as they tore through the Zonian fleet with ruthless efficiency. The Zonian ships were known for their arrogance, their reliance on overwhelming numbers and brute strength. But the Zonians had made one critical mistake. They underestimated the Creak. And now, after underestimating the enemy and the sheer cunning of their tactics, the Creak were paying the price. Hundreds of Creak ships were reduced to floating carcasses, drifting helplessly through space. The once mighty Creak Fleet was now a shattered shell of its former glory, torn apart by relentless Zonian fire. The sleek warships that had been symbols of their power were now just burning husks in space, venting oxygen, debris, and bodies into the void. The enemy had been merciless in their assault. Zorak's mind raced as he looked at the damage reports scrolling across the console. Shields were failing on every ship in the fleet, and the weapon systems were largely offline. He could hear the sirens blaring, the hull groaning under the strain of enemy fire. It was a warship's final death rattle. He needed to make a decision, and quickly. Should he order the fleet to retreat? Should they abandon the mission and try to salvage what was left of their fleet? But retreating seemed impossible. The Zonians had cornered them. A full retreat meant certain annihilation. There was no safe haven left to flee to. Even if the Creak ships tried to flee, the Zonians would hunt them down like prey. Zorak clenched his jaw in frustration. He had never been a leader who gave up easily, but this time, it felt different. This time, it seemed the Creak had met their match. "Captain, the enemy is pressing us from all sides," the tactical officer called out, his voice strained with panic. "We've lost the outer defense perimeter, and their capital ship is preparing to fire another volley." Zorak's eyes narrowed, trying to focus on the holographic map of the battlefield displayed before him. He could see the Zonian capital ship, massive and imposing, positioned at the heart of the Zonian fleet. It was like a blackened moon, brimming with weapons that could turn their ships to scrap in an instant. The Zonian forces were relentless, firing with precision, every shot calculated to cause maximum damage. "Direct hit on the Tempest," another officer shouted. The ship shuddered violently as debris rained down from above. The lights flickered, and the crew members held on for dear life as the ship groaned and buckled from the impact. Zorak barely had time to compose himself before the next round of fire from the enemy capital ship landed, tearing into the Tempest's hull. His eyes darted across the bridge, and he could see the looks of despair on his crew's faces. Some had already abandoned their posts, rushing to escape the dying ship, while others clung to their stations with all their strength. But no one could escape the inevitable. The comm channel crackled, and Zorak's head snapped toward the screen, expecting another transmission from the Zonians. But what he heard was far from what he anticipated. "This is Captain Jason Reeves of the United Earth Ship Defiant. We hear you, Captain Zorak. Reinforcements are en route. Hold your position. Help is on the way." Zorak's heart skipped a beat. He blinked in disbelief. The Earth? Reinforcements? It didn't make sense. The Earth had always kept to itself, too far removed from the chaos of the galaxy. How could Earth forces possibly get here in time? Was this a trap? A lie to draw them into a deeper ambush? Zorak's mind spun, struggling to comprehend the sudden transmission. Before Zorak could process the message, a shadow appeared on the radar, growing larger with each passing second. He squinted at the screen, trying to make sense of what was unfolding before his eyes. It wasn't a Zonian ship. No, this was something new. Something massive. The craft was unlike anything he had ever seen. It was a colossal dreadnought, its shape sleek and imposing, as if it had been forged from the very fabric of space itself. A wave of energy surged from the ship, lighting up the dark void of space as it released a volley of fiery blasts at the Zonian ships. The Zonians, caught off guard, faltered in their attack. The barrage of weapons from this new ship tore through their formation like a hot knife through butter, leaving wreckage in its wake. It was an overwhelming display of power, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Zarak saw a glimmer of hope. "This is the Defiant," came the voice again, this time more authoritative. "Stand by, Captain Zarak. We're taking over the fight from here. Prepare for an assault." Zarak blinked, his mind racing. The Defiant, Earth's ship, was this truly real? Was this the cavalry they had so desperately needed? "Shields holding, Captain. Enemy forces retreating," shouted the tactical officer, his voice trembling with a mixture of awe and disbelief. Zarak could hardly believe his eyes. The Defiant had single-handedly turned the tide of battle. The Zonian fleet, which had been on the verge of obliterating the Creak, was now reeling, struggling to regroup and mount a counterattack. It was almost as if the humans, with their boldness and aggression, had injected new life into the Creak fleet. A flicker of a smile tugged at Zarak's lips. Maybe, just maybe, the day was not yet lost. With the arrival of the Defiant, the tide had shifted. Hope had been reignited. The arrival of the Defiant. The Defiant loomed large in the vastness of space, its sleek, imposing form casting a long shadow over the chaos of the battlefield. The Zonian ships, though massive in their own right, now seemed small and insignificant in the presence of the human dreadnought. Captain Jason Reeves, standing tall on the bridge of his ship, surveyed the scene with a calm demeanor. His crew, highly trained and battle-hardened, were already moving with precision, despite the chaos around them. Targeting systems locked on the lead Zonian vessel, reported the weapons officer, his voice steady and efficient. "Ready to fire, Captain." Reeves nodded. "Launch everything we've got. Let's give them a reason to think twice about this fight." With a mere gesture, the ship's massive weapon systems came alive, unleashing a powerful volley of laser blasts, missiles, and energy beams toward the Zonian fleet. The explosion of light and sound filled the void as the Defiant's weapons struck their targets with surgical precision, tearing through the Zonian ships with a devastating force. The enemy's shields, already weakened from the earlier engagement with the Creak Fleet, crumbled under the sheer might of the Defiant's firepower. One by one, the Zonian vessels exploded in fiery bursts, their remains scattered across space like broken pieces of a shattered mirror. The remaining Zonian ships hesitated, unsure of how to respond to the sudden onslaught. For the first time, the Creak Fleet saw a glimmer of hope. The arrival of the Defiant had tipped the scales in their favor, but the battle was far from won. "Captain, the Zonian flagship is attempting to regroup," the tactical officer said, his voice tense. "It's charging up its main cannon. They're preparing for a final desperate attack." Reeves glanced at the readouts, his mind already calculating the best course of action. The Zonian flagship was enormous, a massive warship bristling with weaponry, and its main cannon was capable of devastating entire fleets in a single shot. If it was allowed to fire, it could potentially turn the tide of the battle in their favor, or worse, destroy the Defiant in one fell swoop. "We can't let them fire that cannon," Reeves muttered under his breath. "Target their main cannon and disable it before they have a chance." All weapons aimed at the flagship's cannon, the weapons officer confirmed. "Firing in 3, 2, 1. The Defiant's weapons roared to life once again, sending a barrage of fire toward the Zonian flagship's cannon. The beams of energy collided with the massive weapon, sending shockwaves rippling through space. The Zonians retaliated immediately, firing their own weapons in return, but the Defiant's shields held strong. deflecting the incoming blasts with ease. A blinding explosion illuminated the battlefield as the Zonian flagship's main cannon was destroyed in a spectacular display of light. The ship trembled, its massive structure groaning under the strain, but it didn't stop firing. Instead, the Zonian flagship pivoted, attempting to bring its remaining guns to bear on the Defiant, determined to go down fighting. "Shields at 80%, Captain," reported the engineering officer. "We're holding, but we can't take many more hits like that." Reeves nodded. The Defiant was strong, but it wasn't invincible. Every blast from the Zonian flagship was eating away at their defenses. He could see the strain on his crew, the sweat glistening on their faces as they worked tirelessly to keep the ship in fighting condition. But their resolve was unshaken. The battle was far from over, and they would fight until the very end. "Redirect energy to the forward shields," Reeves commanded. "We need to give the crew more time to get the weapons back online. And keep firing. We're not letting them get the upper hand." The crew responded without hesitation, redirecting power from non-essential systems to reinforce the shields. As the Defiant weathered the incoming fire, the crew worked in unison to bring their weapons back online, targeting the Zonian flagship's remaining weak spots. Meanwhile, the Creak Fleet, now emboldened by the arrival of the Defiant, began to rally. The once crippled warships slowly regained their footing, their weapon systems coming back online as the crew members scrambled to repair what had been damaged. The morale of the Creak forces had been revitalized. The humans had not only given them a fighting chance, but also proven that they were capable of turning the tide in a way that the Creak had never thought possible. Captain Zarak, still on the bridge of his flagship, watched the chaos unfold through the viewport. The Zonian forces, once so confident in their victory, were now faltering. The Defiant was tearing through their lines with ruthless efficiency, and the Creak ships were slowly finding their footing once again. "Captain, we've regained full control of the Tempest's weapons," shouted the weapons officer. "We're ready to join the fight." Zarak didn't hesitate. "Target the Zonian flagship. Let's finish this." The Creak warship fired its remaining energy reserves, launching a barrage of missiles and energy blasts at the Zonian flagship. The Zonian ship, already battered and weakened from the Defiant's earlier assault, struggled to respond, its remaining defenses unable to withstand the combined firepower of the Defiant and the Creak ships. With a final, resounding explosion, the Zonian flagship was destroyed, its remains scattering in all directions. For a moment, the battlefield fell silent, the debris of the destroyed ships floating aimlessly in space. The Zonian forces, leaderless and demoralized, began to retreat, their once proud fleet scattering into the void. The Defiant and the Creak Fleet had emerged victorious, but at a great cost. Reeves let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding, his gaze sweeping across the bridge. His crew had held strong, but it was clear that this battle had taken its toll. The Defiant had lost several sections of its hull, and several key systems were still offline, but the battle was won. The Creak Fleet had survived, and the Zonians had been forced to retreat. "Victory is ours, Captain," the communications officer said, breaking the silence. "The Zonians are pulling back." Reeves nodded, his expression somber. "We've won this battle, but the war is far from over. Stay alert, everyone." As the Defiant's crew began the process of damage control, Zarak's voice echoed through the comm channel once again. "Captain Reeves, on behalf of the Creak Fleet, I thank you for your timely arrival. We owe you our survival. Your courage and resolve have proven that humans are a force to be reckoned with." Reeves's lips curled into a small smile. "It was our pleasure, Captain Zarak. Earth's forces stand ready to help wherever needed." And with that, the two fleets, once bitter enemies, found themselves united in their victory. But as the stars twinkled in the distance, the shadows of the future loomed large. The Zonians would be back, and the battle for the galaxy was far from over. An uneasy alliance. The aftermath of the battle had left the vast emptiness of space eerily quiet, save for the occasional hum of the Defiance engines and the faint crackling of static over the comm lines. Captain Jason Reeves stood on the bridge, staring out at the scattered debris of the Zonian fleet, now a haunting reminder of the ferocity of the battle. The Defiant was heavily damaged, its outer hull battered, its weapon systems temporarily offline. But the human crew had emerged victorious, having turned the tide of what seemed like an inevitable defeat. Yet, as they continued to drift among the floating wreckage, Reeves knew that this victory was but a small reprieve. The Zonians, although forced into retreat, were not easily defeated. Their empire spanned across countless star systems, their military might almost unparalleled in the galaxy. This brief victory was a small flicker of light in a long, dark war, and it was only a matter of time before the Zonians regrouped and returned with even greater force. "Captain, we've completed the first round of damage assessments," reported the ship's chief engineer, Lieutenant Commander Mara Jameson. "We've got several breaches in the outer hull and some damaged weapon systems, but nothing we can't repair. It'll take us a few hours, but we're functional." "Good," Reeves replied, rubbing his chin thoughtfully. "Keep me updated on any major issues. We can't afford to be sitting ducks out here." Reeves had expected the Defiant to be a symbol of humanity's strength and resilience, but in the wake of this unexpected alliance with the Creak Fleet, he realized that the battle had only just begun. The humans had proven their worth in the eyes of the Creak, but the complexities of interstellar diplomacy were far more tangled than the raw power of their weaponry. Meanwhile, in the command center of the Tempest, Captain Zarak was wrestling with his own thoughts. Though the Creak Fleet had survived, the encounter with the Zonians had left scars, both on their ships and on their spirits. The Creak, once a proud and feared empire, had been humbled. Zarak knew that this temporary victory was fragile, and that the Creak, while grateful for the help of the humans, would not simply bow to Earth's will. His people had always been fiercely independent. The notion of relying on humans for their future security, let alone forming an alliance, was foreign to them. But as he sat at the command console, watching the empty space where the Zonian fleet had once been, Zarak understood the harsh reality. The Creak could not survive alone. The Zonians would eventually return in full force, and unless the Creak adapted and united with others, their empire would fall. Zarak had always been a pragmatic leader, willing to do whatever necessary to ensure the survival of his people. And if that meant forging an uneasy alliance with the humans, then so be it. "Captain Zarak," came a voice from his communications officer. "The humans are requesting a joint briefing. They want to discuss the next steps." Zarak's thoughts shifted. He'd known that this moment would come. The humans had proven their capability in battle, but now came the real test. Diplomacy. Could the Creak and humans truly work together, despite their differences? Or would the fractures in their relationship grow into an insurmountable divide? "Very well," Zarak replied, his voice steady. "Patch them through." A moment later, the image of Captain Reeves appeared on the screen. The human leader's expression was calm and composed, though there was a hint of weariness in his eyes. He had seen the destruction, had witnessed the devastation, and yet his resolve remained unshaken. "Captain Zarak," Reeves began, his voice warm yet firm. "I trust the repairs are underway." Zarak nodded. "Yes, Captain. We've sustained some damage, but nothing that we cannot handle. However, we must discuss what comes next. While we are grateful for your timely arrival, the Zonians will not forget this defeat. Their forces will regroup, and when they return, we will need more than just firepower to overcome them." Reeves tilted his head slightly, his gaze intense. "You're right. The Zonians are relentless. But this victory, as small as it may seem, shows that we can stand together. Humanity has faced extinction before, and we know how to adapt and fight. If we unite our forces, we can hold them off. We can strike back." Zarak studied the human captain closely, the two leaders engaging in an unspoken contest of wills. The Creak had always fought alone, and the thought of relying on another species was a bitter pill to swallow. But Zarak could not deny the truth in Reeves's words. The Zonians would not wait long before striking back, and humanity's resilience had proven that they were formidable allies. The question now was how to forge this alliance in a way that would benefit both sides. "What do you propose?" Zarak asked, his voice low but resolute. Reeves leaned forward slightly, his expression focused. "We start by pooling our resources. Humanity has technologies and tactics that could complement your fleet's strengths. But we need to work together. Share intelligence. Create joint strike teams. Build a coordinated defense network. We can also offer tactical support for ground operations if needed. But above all, we need to establish a lasting alliance, a partnership, not a temporary truce." Zarak was silent for a long moment, considering the offer. The idea of sharing intelligence, working side by side with the humans in combat, it was a significant shift in strategy, one that would take time to implement, but it was also a lifeline. If he rejected this offer, the Creak could very well face extinction, but if he accepted, it would be a gamble, one that could either secure their future or tear their empire apart from within. "I agree," Zarak said finally, his voice steady. "We will cooperate with your people. We will need to discuss the terms in more detail, but for now, I believe this is the only viable path forward." Reeves smiled slightly. "I'm glad to hear that, Captain Zarak. I'll have our diplomats begin working on a formal agreement, but in the meantime, let's keep our focus on the immediate threat. We've won this battle, but the war is far from over." "Agreed," Zarak replied. "Let us hope that this alliance will be enough to see us through the coming storm." As the communication ended and the holographic image of Captain Reeves disappeared from the screen, Zarak leaned back in his chair, his eyes fixed on the vastness of space before him. The stars, once a symbol of the Creek's dominance, now seemed distant and cold. The universe was vast, and the threats it contained were endless. But in this moment, Zarak knew that for better or worse, the fate of his people, and perhaps the galaxy itself, was tied to the humans. And so, the uneasy alliance between the Creak and humanity had been forged. It was a fragile bond, built on necessity and survival, but in a universe filled with endless challenges, it was a bond that might just be strong enough to hold.